Welcome to the Worldwise Wealth Podcast. I'm your host, Nicole, and this podcast is your guide to building a truly borderless life. From entrepreneurship, investment migration, tax optimization, and everything in between, this show highlights the nuances of a global citizen lifestyle. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the show. In today's episode, I sit down with the founder of SafetyWing, Sondre. Now, this is a very interesting conversation. Sondre really dives into the details of what it looked like to start a globally recognized company such as SafetyWing, where the initial inspiration really came from, and what it looked like to get SafetyWing to the point that it is today as a globally recognized brand. Of course, he also dives into topics of their digital nomad pass. So, where you will be able to access various different countries through one global pass, also their country on the internet, and the future of digital nomadism and global citizenship. So, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome, Sondre, to the Worldwise Wealth Podcast. I am very much so looking forward to today's episode. Before diving into all things SafetyWing and digital nomadism, please share a little bit about yourself and your personal journey, your nomad journey, global citizen journey, and how you started building out SafetyWing. I think every listener here knows what SafetyWing is and probably are using many of your products, but it really does. It's an innovative company. And to me, and I'm sure to many others, it seems like it just popped out of nowhere a few years back. And I know that almost all overnight successes take years in the making. So I'm curious what that journey really looked like for you to build it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I picked up on the possibility of being a digital nomad back in 2012. And in 2014, I went to a conference organized by DNX. I think they still run that conference. There was a talk there by Peter Levels, the one that really got him famous. And of course, before that, I had read 4 Hours Work Week and all of those things, like many others. But anyway, that was when I discovered the possibility. And I'd known about working on the internet for a long time, back since the late 90s, early 2000s. I had this web hosting company when I was like a young teenager. And but anyway, that's when it really clicked. I worked at the time, so this is in 2014, 2015, as a policy advisor for the government of Norway. And yeah, essentially then was planning to start a startup and then kind of merged the two. So it was like I set a day to quit my job, start a startup, become a digital nomad at the same time. And boy, I'm so glad I did. um, yeah, it would have really sucked if I didn't do that. But yeah, that was the beginning. And then I started not SafetyWing, but a company called Superside, which is still they're doing great actually. I have it's a freelancer platform that delivers kind of like freelance teams to enterprises like Amazon and Facebook and Google, um, the freelance design team. And yeah, so that's kind of mm, my yeah, that was the beginning. And there we also discovered this problem, which was that the freelancers, complained that they didn't have income protection. They had variable income. They often couldn't access the local safety nets because they were essentially contractors for an international employer. And that's when we discovered this problem, that the internet labor market is borderless, it's global, but all the infrastructure that supports it is local. And with my background from the Norwegian government, that's kind of when I set up. I thought, aha, we should have something like the social safety net I was working on in Norway, but globally available for digital nomads and remote teams. And that was the beginning.
Interesting beginnings. So, what year or what time frame was it when you started your nomadic journey, and what did that look like for you?
That was 2014, 2015, um, late 2014. So, yeah, I moved to Berlin, um, not for that long because we got into Y Combinator. Well, actually, no. First period, I didn't move from Oslo. I didn't move immediately, so it's just like in Oslo, like not really digital nomad, but and then Berlin, and then San Francisco because we got into Y Combinator. So I was planning to go much further, but it was like just like a year, and then I mean I've been traveling a lot, but having being a lot in San Francisco as well ever since.
Interesting. I mean, you really were one of the OGs who were not only living the nomad lifestyle, but realizing that the nomad lifestyle was a possibility. And with the internet just continuing to boom, could become so much more of a possibility. Was there a lot of forward thinking in Safety Wing as to what it could become in the future when maybe a decade down the line, 5 years down the line, you were like, this could be something now, but in the future, if we start this now, this could really boom. Did you foresee, definitely not what happened in 2020, but did you foresee more freelancers, contractors, remote work? Like, what did you see for that long term vision of Safety Wing?
Yeah, no, I basically what has happened was what we predicted. And it's almost weird to think back now how fringe it was. It's hard to recall, like in 2015, 2016, how remote work, how fringe it was. But it was extremely fringe. Like even among very creative startup scene, it was like unheard of. Um, so, but no, I mean, I think I had a unique vantage point because I'd grown up on the internet a little bit and I worked kind of remote this in sort of 2000s. This was just the way things was done. So it kind of was obvious to me. Like it wasn't like it didn't feel like some great. It was more like completely obvious. Like this works, and everyone's going to work like this in the future. Um, no, so I and then it was I found these adoption curves, and if you see them, they stretch back to 2000s, sorry, 90s, early 90s. You start this essentially shift to remote work, and it's linear, so it's not like a fast S curve. It's more like yeah, it's a bit of a slower technological adoption, but that's when it begins. And yeah, and if you what happened with COVID was just an acceleration of about 5 years. So it's like, but I knew where we would be. It's just that we got there a little bit faster. And remote work is actually one of the few things that didn't return to trend post COVID. So like almost every other like COVID thing, like COVID, that got a boost for COVID, like t- t- uh, telemedicine, as it's still awkwardly called, and even e-commerce. So, if you recall, they had a big boost. They both fell down to trend. I'm still a bit shocked that that telemedicine fell back to trend. I would have thought some people, would have sticked, but remote work did not fell back to trend, contrary to how you would assume when you read the media. It's actually 5x where it would have been on trend. So like share of US workforce was like 3% before, would have been like 4 or 5%, and instead is like 18% of workforce. It's way ahead of trend, and it fell back, and the only fallback that happened was in 2021. That's another thing that people get so confused about now, is because there are these big corporations who still 5 years later, 2 hours later, still trying to go back to the office unsuccessfully, and they're in this sort of like little personal Groundhog Day. And but for the rest of the economy, like the back to office thing happened in 2021, late 2020 to 2021, and since then it's just returned to steady growth. So the end state is just any job that can be remote will be remote. Um, and yeah, so that's that part. That's like remote work, completely obvious. Digital nomadism, I think it's just downstream of remote work. It's like um, and the value is immense. So the initial thing, which is a little bit gone, but it's still here, right? Is that people associate digital nomadism with backpacking, holiday backpacking. But that's just like a little sliver of the kind of preference pool. What digital nomadism allows is to be unconstrained from living near your job. And when you have lifted that constraint, you see kind of like a rainbow of possible preferences, right? Some for a little while, maybe it's like literally backpacking, but that's not what you typically see, right? You more see that some people live skiing in Bansko, right? And some people live on a beach town, or some people do explore different cities until they find one they love. Uh, the common denominator is more that they're location independent. They're free to move, and it's really, and we see this is like the downstream thing of the digital nomad phenomenon is going to be one of the most interesting things in the decade ahead, because it's going to allow for the possibilities of new cities to be built, and ways of living, and I'm very excited about that. So that was the digital nomad part. And then, but of course, when we started day one of SafetyWing, we actually thought even further. We imagined we would build a global social safety net, but also a country on the internet. And that is, in a way, we're still early. So like even today, that feels early, timing wise, meaning that on remote work, we were fringe when we started, but on internet country building, we're still fringe, thankfully, because I do like, I don't like being too mainstream. But So an internet country, we saw that right away, and that reasoning was just that we wanted to make this global social safety net, and then we just saw kind of like, if we make that, what will that look like? Today the entities that provide social safety net are countries. So might the thing we build look more like a country? Um, and and I think it will be like, if you look historically around social structures, they adapt to the reality that you live in. So when we have, like if you were on the moon, people would buy and sell air. And similarly, in before the nation state, like pre 1600s, they were mostly city states. But once you got better communication technology and transport, then the possibility to build these nation states became possible, and weapons also was part of that. So I think a similar thing happened now. Like, we're already living on the internet that has the feature of everyone being connected to everyone else, and people living in different parts of the world working for the same companies, people anywhere in the world who potentially could move to anywhere else and indeed do. That's going to mean we're going to get a new governance layer, and that's going to be global. It's going to be on the internet.
Okay, so I definitely want to dive into this. I want to afterward backtrack back to the entrepreneurial side. I have some questions around that. But while we're on this topic, I mean, Safety Wing, there are definitely some innovative things that the company is doing now. And like you were just mentioning, implementing now for the future. So I'm curious specifically this country on the internet. Like, I anyone listening, and you knowing a little bit about my background, I am very anti-government, very much so liberalist as much as possible. And so I'm curious what would be not only the implementation and like the practical side of this country on the internet. I am curious about that aspect, but also what would be some of the values, the mission that would really resonate with Safety Wing and then with like-minded digital nomads.
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, um, it is, of course, like, it would resonate with anyone, as all digital nomads are pretty pro freedom, and early adopters, like, as a segment right now, that would certainly be something that is a value of the of SafetyWing. SafetyWing is a bit unique though in many other cases. Like, if you were to say, like, right now there is a growing community that would be associated with the sort of internet country idea, and that's the sort of network states community. And I've been to those conferences, and somehow they're all earlier stage than us, so which tells me that this is still early, but it's coming. Like, internet country is an industry, like, in a way it's an ecosystem of offerings that offer products and services that used to be provided by countries. Our values, as how they are distinct in that ecosystem. Um, so I'm not putting us in the network state ecosystem relative to those. Yeah, the shared thing I mentioned is freedom. The differentiator, I would say, we're more product oriented than a lot of them. I feel like too many of them are very, and yeah, we're pretty like heady too at times, but they're like all the think, I think, little product like um that's a difference. I think we're maybe equally idealistic but also a little bit more pragmatic. mm, I also think that we have a slightly more, maybe compared to you. uh okay, so what's our take to the current nation states? So the way I would predict that this is going to play out, by the way, is similar to what happened when the city states were engulfed by the nation states. So the city states still kind of existed. Like Venice city government has continuous existence with the Venice city state, which is now part of the Kingdom of Italy, or I guess it was called Kingdom of Italy. And so I think a similar thing is going to happen now, where there's going to be a move of tasks and responsibilities from that local layer over to the global layer, and it's going to be whatever it makes sense to solve at that layer. And that's going to be a transition period that's sort of multi-decade. And in the beginning, you will likely just have an internet country citizenship in addition to your nation state citizenship. And um, one of our approaches, this is not really a value, but no, it is kind of a value, is that we're engaging with the old more, and that's serving us so well. But it's very unique in that ecosystem, in the sort of network stake ecosystem. So to give an example here is the introduction of nomad visas. So which I would say that we are a big part in that it happened the way that it did. So quick story here. So in late 2019, we give a talk at Web Summit. Person from Barbados watches that talk, goes back 6 months later, COVID hit, sends a letter to the local government suggesting something we suggested in the talk, this idea of nomad visas to save their tourist dependent economy that was flailing. And they implement that in a couple of months. And now something like 80 countries have implemented nomad visas, and we've been invited to United Nations to talk about it. We have like some relationship with like 30 different countries, and this is with almost no effort. But that tells you that like this willingness to kind of interact with the landholding countries is a great benefit, I think. And that when you have an idea kind of whose time has come, apparently you can quick change even in government. um, and that's also how we intend to build from here until our internet country visa, this passport, is to make a kind of Schengen but for countries with nomad visas, and couple that with an identification, which makes you actually even more than passport. It's actually a global residency.
I'm curious how, and I'm sure you've talked to various different countries at this point. I'm curious how other countries are not only viewing, but accepting the idea of a country on the internet. I'm thinking, in what we do, especially Western countries want to be more and more dominating, controlling. So I'm curious how a lot of countries are viewing a potential country on the internet down the line.
Yeah. Down the line, I think it can go two ways, but we're also very aware of this dynamic. So roughly, it can go into a scenario where we appear as threat, and then it's like ban, prevent. Uh, like with a lot of internet stuff, that's not really going to work, but it's going to drag it out for sure. Um, it's going to make it more painful in the transition for everyone. Now, the other dynamic that can totally appear is that it's seen as an opportunity and they compete to win. And that's what we're trying to like tilt tilt it into that dynamic. And the whole nomad city success, and but also a lot of the kind of the way cities have been competing for digital nomads have played in that direction for a long time. So far it's going in that direction, where it's like a field where the countries try to win, and there is certainly a winning to be had here, right? Because in a transition that is decades long, you have the possibility for uh, countries, often depopulated areas, depopulated cities, but also just other countries to attract what they often see in the beginning as a sort of dream tourist. It's a tourist that is like a knowledge worker and often like creatives and has this like positive externalities with their local economies, bringing innovation and connections and startups to their while also spending like a tourist because they have income from abroad. So that's the bucket this is landing. So as of right now, it's zero negativity from the countries. They just see it as a 100% win. uh, for now. That might still change, and some event can tilt that out. But as of right now, we're on that track, and you can imagine how. Like, it's not viewed as people don't think of digital nomads as immigrants. In a way, it's more like expats, but even better than expats, because it's more creative and the income is from abroad. Like, they're not using any local public services. They're not competing for local jobs. They're just spending and providing income for the local kind of businesses, and in the same way that the tourist would, but longer stretches of time.
Really interesting to hear your on the ground insight on how you see that playing out in the longer term. So I'm curious now when we're talking specifically regarding the country on the internet, also Nomad Border Pass, what does that look like in theory of would the pass holder, the citizen of the internet country, would they be obtaining residency in said internet country and have additional residency options through physical countries, have the right to live for a period of time in physical countries? What about taxation? Like, how would that practically work if somebody were a nomad and not really wanting to live in one or two specific countries? What would that look like for the longer term for somebody?
Yeah. Well, if I could first answer the immediate term, and then I can think about the long term. So in the immediate term, the nomad visas are all set up in a similar way, which is that it is a visa that typically has something like 4,000 a month income requirement, that you have some remote online income on that order of magnitude. And that's often it in many of them, um, which it makes it very unique among the visas, meaning that it's often available for any host country as long as you meet that requirement. And it's the most common variant has 1 year, but infinitely renewable. Although there are also a 3 year, a few places, and 5 year. Um, as for taxes, in some places that's not dealt with. They kind of thought of it like tourist still. While in other places like Greece, I think they've like specifically said if you tax locally, it's half tax. So they've added a kind of tax incentive, and some I can't recall it, but some have also had these like kind of like you're not paying taxes for so and so long. Um, so that's kind of the way it looks now. In the future, I mean, if we're successful in making this um, productized fully, you would through the SafetyWing so-called Nomad Citizen product, you would not only have the social safety net, but you would also have this. You would sort of through SafetyWing arrange kind of with a click the residency in some country, and we would kind of apply and activate that for you, and arrange that. Uh, to begin with, we would not get into taxation, although we are certainly open to, and it's pretty obvious how it would be solved if we were to, which is akin to the residency model for other such international affairs and tech, which is just that uh, you would pay taxes, relative to how many days you stayed somewhere, and that we could potentially process that. That said, though, that's not an active project we had, but that's just where that is something we have that has been mentioned, that's been brought up, and I'm sure it would end up in that domain. Although it's not the only place it can add up. There is another equilibrium that is also happening, and that is this idea that everyone has their own entity, like company. It's very common among digital nomads for a long time. So you have companies like Solo, XOLO, where you can sort of, for whatever it is, 99 a month, you get this kind of Estonian entity that you can invoice from and everything. And yeah, that's a way that this is the way that is the most, I would say, dangerous for the taxation abilities for countries. They want it is in their interest that people remain private, because if they do this, you get a very strong winner takes all effect, where the best places to register your company is going to just capture all of them, and that's fine when it's 1%. But if it's 30% of the labor force, that's no longer fine. That becomes like significantly reduction in taxability.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because we do help quite a few clients, and there are very clear and very few jurisdictions that are much more beneficial than most other jurisdictions in the globe. I'm curious your personal insights on and what you have seen. So with our clients, we see a lot of, I'm from Canada originally, a lot of Canadians, even Americans, Brits, Australians, New Zealand. So Westerners who are really wanting to the medium to long term relocate and leave the West and relocate to somewhere like in Asia or a South America. And I'm curious what you personally see in this trend, if you see this as something that will continue or speed up in the future of more Westerners really looking to leave the West because of various certain policies, politics. There's a lot going on in different Western countries, but I'm just curious your take on this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at our customers and where they distribute the individuals, that looks almost like it really matches. If you just were to long time average ranking on nomadlist.com, it really matches. It matches that really well. We have a lot of customers in Chiang Mai and Bali, for example, and like literally something like 20,000 Bali, like tons of customers. Um, so you definitely see that, and as you can tell, right, as you know, taxation is not the only thing playing in there. In the taxation is sometimes a separate problem from the residency question. Sometimes it gets mixed up, but not always. Um, and as when it comes to how people do, taxation and residency, the most common when people start out is that they're just contractors in their home country, whatever that was, because that's just the most easy. That's where they started. Um, and uh, and then once they get a little more sophisticated, they might set up an entity in a like a better jurisdiction, especially if they've been out for a while and they maybe start to wonder like, hey, my home country's setup for this actually is terrible. Like if I just switch to this other one, it wouldn't matter for me at all because I'm not in my home country. And that's the other one you see, and then you do see essentially the usual suspects plus US, right? Which is like this odd one out. Like, why would anyone register in the US? But it does happen often. I think maybe Stripe Atlas is like partly to blame, like almost single-handedly causing a lot of entities to be registered in the US because that's such a good package. Um, so yeah, but yeah, Estonia, a big one with services like Solo. Um, Singapore, previously Hong Kong, that's reduced obviously, but it used to be a top three, and it's still present. Um, what else? I mean, in our world, the insurance world, you see a lot more of these like old school tax haven type locations, like Bermuda, And but that and Cayman Islands and whatever used for insurance, but that's like a regulatory thing. It's a very common for insurance or insurance companies to have jurisdiction in those places. I haven't seen that in a big way for nomads, but I'm guessing that that's mostly inertia. That's a productization. So if someone were to make like Stripe Atlas, but for Turks and Caicos, like that would do pretty well. Um, is my guess. But as of right now, I think it's just too much of a hassle. You have to have insider knowledge to set that up, so you don't see a lot of that yet. To my knowledge, maybe someone is setting that up right now. But yeah, that's all I've seen. But yeah, um, but still, though, most common is just contractor in home country.
Interesting. Really interesting to hear your insights of what you see. So I want to, because I am very curious about what it has looked like to build up such a large scale global company that has so many different facets. I think, of course, everyone initially knows SafetyWing for insurance, but you really do work in so many different areas for digital nomads and global citizens. So I'm curious what it has looked like to grow and expand your company. And I mean, you have global reach now, you have how many employees throughout the world. So I'm curious what that entrepreneurial journey looks like from you, kind of going back to our initial discussion of starting at the beginning to really growing this massive scale company. If you raised capital, like what that really looked like behind the scenes.
Yeah, sure. So we started in 2018, went through Y Combinator. We did raise capital in the beginning. We raised 55 million dollars in capital, like in venture funding, and through like a regular startup cycle, like seed, series A and B. Um, we launched first nomad insurance, and then health insurance for remote teams, and then health insurance for individuals, and uh, we started Plumia, but that it's been going on more as a think tank than a product. Although the product is coming, but it's just been in the works for a long time. And Nomad Citizen, which is now upcoming, which is this kind of V1 really of the social safety net, where we also have income guarantee and the Nomad Border Pass visa package um, as a bundle. Um, but yeah, so a little bit of a secret. Actually, I'm not sure if I said too much there. I was supposed to be a bit stealth about that, but I don't think so. So that's the different things we've been doing. How's the journey been? I mean, I'd built a company before then, so I knew a little bit about what was important. I knew doing Y Combinator was great. Highly recommend that. Would do it again. So uh, it would definitely apply there if uh, I was starting again. Mm, building a team. Another thing I learned from first companies like is that culture is incredibly important. One of the few things that scale is vision and values. I erroneously had categorized. I thought that was corporate BS. It's not. There's a lot of things that are corporate BS that is absolutely corporate BS, but not vision and values. It just is because they're insincere about it. But if it's sincere, that is like the DNA of the company and the only thing that really scales. So we did that right with SafetyWing, and we built an incredibly unique culture that is so special. Actually, like it's really is a unique place, and we've been able to preserve that to the current scale. And there are it's just a very authentic. Um, High authenticity, high autonomy, but still like very joyful and productive um, culture. So yeah, people are full of very kind, real, and yet competent people. It's very very enjoyable. So that was a big part, like just doing culture right, which is basically just writing down the vision and values early and then applying it, consistently from the early days, including in hiring. What else? Um, I mean, entrepreneurship is. it's a slog of building and problem solving on product and growth, probably, which never ends. Like that's TLDR. In the beginning, it's incredibly romantic because there are no like you have no idea what's possible, and you just may dream up these things, and a lot of that is right, but you don't know how long certain things will take. And we have things from like our initial plan that is still is like far away from being complete. um but yeah, and then you get something live, making a brand. That was another thing I learned from last one is uh like being good, like being good is, if you're a startup, being good means you're dead, because you have to be great to survive and be so. And being great means being unique and thinking independently, including on brand, I would say. Certainly on product, and I think a lot of people would see that, but I would claim on brand as well. That's also one lesson from the first one. Like there's a way past that in the internet where it was enough to kind of look professional. That's too easy to copy. Like you have to be unique. And so that was another thing we did. I think we did really well. um, but yeah, uh, we lived through the COVID pandemic. It was a mixed, right, because as you recall, it was an acceleration for our underlying premise, but a big part of our revenue at the time was in nomad insurance, which only worked when you were abroad. And so we had incredible challenges with that. Like we literally almost started. One story is like we had a coverage that no one knew about, which was called political evacuation. And it said that if this US agency put travel warning 5 on any country, then you had a right to evacuate. And as you may recall, during COVID, like they put travel warning on like every country in the world. So every one of our customers qualified for evacuation. And the moral dilemma was no one knew about this because this is not a common coverage. It was something we put in like slightly ideological reasons. We thought that was cool. So we had the possibility to just like stay quiet about this. And this was a fervent discussion inside the company, and whether we should tell our customers or not. And you can say the reason why we wouldn't, it's because, well, if any the customers that evacuated would no longer be our customers because their insurance doesn't work in their home country. It's early COVID with the high uncertainty, how long is this going to last? Who knows? So it's like basically it's like we're going to die. And and so we had this discussion about it. And one of our values is like aim for the ideal, and this was argued that it's like we there are many things we've chosen not to do, like do ads, because we see this like as a seed of like bad things on the internet. And this was one of them. Like this is this is not this is bad, this is not therefore we can't do it. So we decided to do it. And uh we did it very wholeheartedly, like 10 days to evacuation, 5 days. I was sitting like I think 3 nights in a row evacuating, arranging with evacuation things. And a third of our customers did evacuate, so it was not nothing, but we didn't die. And over the summer, that kind of spread a little bit how we communicated. And so from August to December in 2020, when no one traveled, we grew like 300% or something. So ended up as a very happy ending. That was probably like the top challenge of our story. And now we're a bit like out of the woods. Like we're totally gonna make it. Um, and I think we will. We certainly will. I mean, Nomad Citizen is already in beta, but we will, get to the country on the internet. We will make the passport. We will, and yeah, but it's still early days.
Very interesting discussion. Thank you for sharing everything you shared and for sharing some insights into the company as well. And I completely agree. You've built an amazing mission, culture, brand. I think SafetyWing is very recognizable to every single digital nomad out there. So, share a little bit about the offerings, the insurance products, maybe any other products, and then where people can find SafetyWing online.
Sure. Yeah. So right now, I mean, the major products we have would be Nomad Insurance. So that's actually very recently been updated to have two tiers. So there's like Nomad Insurance or Nomad Health. Nomad Health also works in your home country, so it could be like your health insurance, your regular health insurance. And then if you have a remote team, you can have health insurance for your remote team. It's a dashboard. You can add employees or contractor anywhere in the world and offer everyone the kind of same consistent good, and also have various add-ons that might be common, like a benefits package. And and then there are these products that are in closed betas, which you can't really buy yet. You can sign up for a wait list, but which is Nomad Pass, which is a visa package to get a package of these like Nomad visas, and then Nomad Citizen coming soon, although also in closed beta, which is um, kind of this MVP of a social safety net, where you for $3.99 you get like a very high quality health insurance, but also like income protection, and it works everywhere, including the US. So that's that one.
Well, thank you for being here, Sondre. Thank you for sharing everything you've shared today, and all the links for SafetyWing are below, so check them out there. You've just listened to the Worldwise Wealth podcast. Visit our links in the show notes below or at worldwisecapital.com to learn more about how we can assist in your borderless diversification journey. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next episode.